Welcome to the Going Green podcast. Today we're going to have a look at two little things. One is the grim carbon dioxide forecast for 2024, but also we're going to have a look at companies and making their green claims. It's not good news.
No, it's not.
No, carbon dioxide forecast for 2024 is it's
Bad.
going up. Yeah.
The-
If you look at the chart for the last few years, the amount of carbon dioxide produced in the sort of air is actually going up.
And what we mean by going up, they do cycle. There is over the year there is a peak and there is a minimum, and basically, so they plot
The average.
the average. So the average is going up, and what they are looking at is seeing that the average not is going up, but is, of course, they can track how high the average is got. So we're looking at in 1960s or is 1950s? I can't remember what the year they started the prediction. 1958. So
Yeah. And the grim news is that in sometime like 1958, we were rising at about 1 part per million per year. And then we've got it going up by 1.5. And then in the next few years, it's at 2. And currently, we're at increase of 2.5 a year. And that's since we've started all these COPs and saying, right, we're going to put in some targets, we're going to lower CO2 emissions, and it's still increasing. And it's not that we're just continuing going up. We're still accelerating going up. And this is the really grim news, to think that countries are now trying to cut down their CO2 emissions, and yet it's still on the rise. It's still increasing. And this is, well, disaster in the making, isn't it?
Well, yes. The answer to this is the actual chart of sort of the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, and it's done at Mauna
Mauna Loa.
There we go, in Hawaii. Very exciting place, and they do all their data from there. And the idea of looking at this is give an illustration of what the concentration of CO2 is in the atmosphere, so that you can basically say, well, we know how much is increasing year upon year. We know the average. We can see it going up, and therefore we can then see how well we're doing climate or goal-wise against reducing CO2 emissions, or even reducing the amount it's going up by.
Yeah. So CO2 emissions is basically the more CO2 we have in the air, the more global warming. And this is something I've been teaching all my students. We've been having a lot of fun imagining your head is a carbon atom and your oxygen atoms are your hands. And I ask them to do a little bit of exercise. They start moving their arms around, and that's what happens with carbon dioxide. It absorbs this infrared radiation given off by the Earth, heat, and they start vibrating around. Rather than letting this infrared go through, they start absorbing it and they keep the heat in.
And obviously that's the problem in regards to why CO2 is so bad, is because basically it takes the infrared in and then of course re-radiates it out as infrared. They don't radiate it out as light. That'd be a shame. That'd be very cool. Be like sort of the Northern Lights or the Southern Lights, just wherever it. But no, unfortunately, it's not. And so that's the pathway for all the heating. That's the concentration of CO2 you directly linked. And so to keep the heat down, or to lower the climate temperature, it is seen that the amount of CO2 we have put out needs to be decreased, which is why we talk about all the carbon capture, carbon neutral, or even carbon negative, is to remove the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, so that any warming effect that the CO2 produces is minimal or minimized, so that the climate could obviously then either cool down or we can stay at a nice constant temperature, because of course we don't want to freeze. We just want to not get any hotter. So that's the reason why these measurements are done and seen, is because it's a direct link between them.
And the ongoing CO2 rise is mainly driven by fossil fuels. It's fossil fuel burning. We're also changing the use of land. We're cutting down those rainforests, and we're replacing that with either agriculture or worse, places for people to live, because they're really sort of very negative. There are a few things that are making life worse at the moment. The El Nino is sort of lowering some of the sort of tropical carbon sinks, places that sort of attract more carbon. They're not at the moment. So that's sort of making things a little bit worse. However, the global trend is we're still going up in CO2, whereas we should be coming down and aiming for net zero. Now, that doesn't mean to say we can't still do it, but unfortunately, we're not probably going to do it with the 1.5-degree rise. It might be a 2-degree rise. And how does that affect people? Well, that's more water being taken out of the poles or the ice and turned into water. We're looking at more fires. We're looking at more floods. We're looking at not such a nice place to live in.
Yeah.
Even if you have got somewhere to live, you're not flooded.
Yeah. So as you can see, it's not a good scenario, all these things, which is why, of course, that's why we talk about. That's why these things are talked about in relation to COP and those sort of things. Now, alongside that, we just mentioned it earlier, is of course what you can do as a company is basically do all these lovely things, what is known as carbon offsets, and they're not directly true in relation to trying to reduce the amount of carbon you're exporting or releasing. It's the idea, sort of, if I pay for someone else to collect some, then that offsets my the amount of carbon CO2 I produced. So that's how the scheme works. But one of the many things of these schemes is these schemes, they're all loads of them, have quite a lot of claims, and lots of companies buy into these claims, saying they are now managing to offset their carbon, however tons they want to admit to saying, except of course they're found out to be not actually offsetting their claims. And
Well, they're lying.
essentially, well, it's one of those things where are they lying at what point? They're paying the money for the offset, right? But they're not actually getting the offset. Who is at fault? Is it the person who's doing the offset, or is the company for buying into the offset? And so there's this huge problem of sort of not chicken and the egg, but sort of who is breaking the law. Has indicated that we need to get some rules out the gate. And in, I think it was 2008, well, a report was written in 2019 of a survey that was done in 2018. So, glance all over that, of done by not a large group, but a sort of a EU. I was in Europe now, because of course, well, we were inside the EU at the time.
We were inside Europe at that time. Pre-Brexit.
So pre-Brexit. So a European study found that all greenwashing claims, these are the claims that essentially, we are doing more environmentally things, as well as the green
We probably are.
carbon offsets, that's where it's relation, were found to be not necessarily false, but not correct. And I'm going to say that word in regards to, as in, yes, they did pay for 40 tons of CO2 to be absorbed or captured, but they didn't actually capture 40 tons of CO2. Just glancing over that.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that's what they found. 40% of all, not claims on the internet, that's the wrong way to put it, but all government or corporate claims of carbon capture were false. So the idea that now
Not necessarily false, just not true.
Yeah.
Subtle
Subtle
difference.
difference. And the idea is that, of course, consumers like you, we are being misled, or greenwashed is the technical term, by this, in saying that companies or products or things are greener or cleaner than they are. And so the idea is to change that to provide more transparency, to sort of give better guidance to consumers, and to say, finally, are you actually emitting those 40 ton capturing? Are you planning to capture 40 tons? That's fine. But have you actually captured that 40 tons? Oh, that's the devil in the detail part. So, anyway, so that's what becomes. So, the UK and the EU separately, because of course we're now post Brexit, have come up with two, not different ways, but some very similar ways to talk about these green claims, as in to sort of get rid of the greenwashing and provide actual green claims, facts, or statistics, to make everything greener, cleaner,
Yeah.
make the green claims greener or cleaner.
Yeah. Okay. So the UK was a little bit quicker than the EU in getting going on this. So we've had this for a while now, and we have something called the Green Claims Code. And basically, here, this is sort of the Competition Markets Authority, the CMA, has developed this Green Claims Code, which sets out 6 points, which makes you check that your environmental claims are genuine and they're genuinely green. So we've got those. Now, the European Union is sort of a little bit behind us, and they've just got there now. And of course, they don't want to have a green claims code. They're going to have European directives, aren't they?
They're going to have the green code directives, or and the European one is a little bit more different, because it's a bit more federal style, as opposed to the UK, which is sort of the correct level. So the EU directive, this green code directive, is essentially saying that all EU countries must come up with their own, say, green claims code. That the UK has done. So it's one of those, as I said, we've done it first, but the directive isn't actually on creating the code. It's to institute that EU countries actually do create their own code, and that basically everybody must follow it, which is fair enough and it's fine. And so, going through the claims, we'll go through some of the ideas in a sec, because they're all very similar. But the EU one, it has to be verified by, of course, a third party. And we would look
I have a name for those, don't I, Paul? I call them quangos. Yeah, a little sort of committee set up by sort of the government, and it's jobs for the boys. And every country in the EU will have their own different one, won't they?
Yes. And so the idea, essentially, let's say you sell a car or a tomato, whatever you want to sell, and let's say you want to sell in Poland. You must fit your green claims about that product, car, tomato, must fit the Polish green code terms, whatever, right? Now, if you wanted to sell your tomato, car, whatever, in France, as in your Poland, you now must apply both Polish and French green code claims, rules, regulations, ideas in relation to all those things. And they might be different, so we're not going. And of course, eventually, the idea, if you want to sell something EU wide, you have to follow all 27, sorry, EU member states green code rules. So the idea, it's very simple. The idea is basically is, if of course a company fails this code, then of course then they can be litigated against, slap on the wrist or fined for breaking the rules, saying you claimed to do 20 or you claim to do 40, but you only managed to do 20, we're going to fine you for not doing that extra 20. And in theory, the idea is that if you actually do follow the rules, then you can use it as proof to stop being litigated against, as in stop being fined. That's the idea. And of course, the fines are up to the EU member states. As I said, it's a directive for the EU member states to actually implement, and they can do whatever. They haven't got to the implementation. They've only been told now, officially, by the EU Parliament that this directive is now in place. So they've got some time. We're talking 2026 sort of implementation. We're not sort of, they must do it now. They've got some time, but of course it's all coming through. And in the meantime, of course, the UK has done, as we said, created their own green claims regulation.
Code.
Too many of these terms floating around.
For you, yes.
And so it's one of those things where you might find all the EU countries might have been, copying someone's homework, sort of looking over and sort of saying, "Oh, that's a good one." Well, So we'll glance over what actually is going to happen for the EU, but we should go through what the UK one states, because we've got them.
Okay, so let's start with some of these then. Green claims must be truthful and accurate. The businesses must live up to the claims that they make about their products, services, brands, and activities. So we're going to be truthful. So today I can be very truthful and say that I've got lots of cameras switched on. I've got lights here, and we've got sound equipment, and I've got some computers on, and well, we actually got quite a lot of computers on, and we got video conferencing going on. And at the moment, all of the electricity that is there is being covered by our solar panels. And I can look at the meter and I can see that we are actually, even with all that, still exporting some electricity.
Now, we can't directly actually say how much electricity we're importing.
The meter won't tell us.
The meter won't tell us, but we'll glance over that. But it does say we're not importing, which is the fact. So as I said, we're being accurate and truthful. The meter doesn't say how much we're importing. So we could be covering it just about, or we could be incorporating it. So
quite a lot.
Being truthful, following the law, we're being, or the code, truthful.
Now, it's also blooming cold here. Outside at the moment, it's minus 3.8 degrees Celsius. At least it was when we started the broadcast. And in here, it's a little bit warmer. Not that much warmer, but it is warmer. Hence we got the fleeces on.
Yes.
And we put on our heating. Now, we're actually based outside here. Our studio is actually not inside our house, but outside, and we're actually in a marquee, and we've had to heat that. And I put my jet engine on. It's a propane heater, and we put that on for 5-10 minutes, and it's raised the temperature here, so it's okay to sit in here and actually to sort of do a broadcast.
Yeah.
And I might actually later have to put it on again, because I'm going to be teaching out here. My studio transforms into a classroom, and I'm going to be teaching out here, and I'll again have to put that on. So that is going to produce some carbon dioxide.
So although we're not, electricity is not producing CO2, of course our heating is. Now that all brings us back into the claim number 2, or the rule number 2, shall we say, and that is to be clear and unambiguous, as in the meaning that the consumer is likely to take from a product's messaging and the credentials of that product should match. And so that's what we're saying here is openly we are heating this place using gas, and that's one of those things where unfortunately we have to do that, but we are making it clear that it is heated by gas, and we make no apologies for it, because it's one of those things where if we could find a better solution we would, but
And our house indoors is also heated by gas, and that's running at about, well, it's been varying, but between 5 and 30 pence an hour.
So,
So
anyway,
we're quite pleased with that because our house is reasonably well insulated, and so that's working quite well. Mind you, the marquee we're out here is also very well insulated, and that tries to sort of keep our costs down because it's not just in my interest to do greenwashing and make these claims. It's also in my interest to stay reasonably warm.
and so upon those sort of statements, is that, of course, that leads into number 3, which is, of course, we should not omit or even hide important information. Now, that needs to be underlighted,
Underlined.
underlined, not under highlighted. So, claims, as in green claims, must not prevent someone from making an informed choice because of the information they leave out.
So what can we do about, well, the electricity? We're covering that, except we don't during the night time because at night time the sun doesn't shine, and we also, don't usually put the cameras on. We still have the computers on. We put TVs on and lights on so we can see. So we're still going to be using and importing some electricity. Of course, if we've got a grotty day, we're also not going to export much electricity and we'll have to still import some.
No.
There's not much I can do about the heating. I can go over to a different form of heating, which will use electricity, but actually that costs more for me. And of course, we've also got to bring in the system. Soon, my gas boiler will reach its sort of
Not end dates.
efficiency end of life, really. And we'll have to think about replacing that. And of course, the rules are changing so that when we replace it, we won't be allowed to be replacing it with another gas boiler, but we'll in fact then have to convert to heating the house by something like an air source heater. And that's going to be a little bit different
Yes.
and probably more expensive.
Well, yeah, well, it always is. Anyway, so now we need to turn into some rules that, of course, not we can't directly use or do, but it's one of those things where we are. If you follow the rules, we are only allowed to make fair and meaningful comparisons. Now, sort of, yeah, we don't do comparisons that much here, so can't do that. But any product compared any products compared should meet the same needs or to be intended for the same purposes. Yeah.
Now, our problem here is we don't actually have any products, really. We have services. And my services are I do some teaching, and students come here for lessons. Now, if I compare myself with somebody else who now perhaps drives to a student's house, they're not using any electricity, they're not using any heating themselves because that's all been provided by the client. And comparing them with me, well, that's a little bit different, you see. So can we claim the same as they can? And the answer is no, because we have a classroom, we have a laboratory here. And so our claim is to be different and we have to compare ourselves basically like with like. And
We have yet to find that.
we've yet to find someone who actually does the same as we do.
So, yeah.
Difficult to then compare when we're trying to do that.
So,
So products can be a bit more difficult. It depends who else is in your sort of market area. So we can just compare ourselves with sort of other similar type of places like a school. And in fact, compared with a school, we are highly efficient compared with most schools. But then they are really completely different scenarios.
so yeah. Just one of those things to not to consider, but to remember, all these rules and things. These are not necessarily formal rules, but more like guidance and sort of, you know. So we move on to rule number 5 or code number 5, or whatever, and it's to consider the full life cycle of the product. When making claims, businesses must consider the total impact of the product or service. Claims can be misleading when they don't reflect the overall impact or where they focus on one aspect of it but not another. And that goes back into relation of what you were saying earlier, in that we here, the students come here, so we don't have to deal with the transporting or those sort of impacts. But of course, if we went out, that's all is fair game in sort of relation to that. So it's a bit sort of a struggle, but you can sort of see the idea that, of course, if you slap on saying something's recyclable, you need to actually make it sure it's recyclable, as opposed to saying, yeah, let's say you buy something that they say is recyclable, then you know, in theory, it should be, and whether or not it is isn't your fault. But of course, you should only be looking at things that are recyclable, and they should be making sure that they claim if they're recyclable, it actually is recyclable. Because what we found some packaging that said it is recyclable, and it was sort of like, oh yes, it has to be done in a. Oh, it was those green bags that now they say are the compostable, and the answer is it's only compostable in an industrial composting setting, as opposed to to do home composting.
Yes.
It was something like that, and yeah, so it was not. Yes, it was composting, as in it was can go in the food waste bin, but it wouldn't go into a consumer food compost heap. It had to go to an industrial compost heap, which of course that was the misleading claim. Go over that. So yes, but the people buying that product didn't know those claims, and they only found out, and then they were all panicked about it. So there you go.
So, yeah, as we say, claims here can be slightly misleading because sometimes you're just trying to compare like with like, and it's difficult, and it's trying to do the overall impact. So, for instance, do I claim here that because I don't go out using a car, then that's better. Except people come to me and they will use their car. Now, that of course isn't directly related to my company, but it does cause a little bit of misleading information. And so you have to be very clear what you are claiming. The last of these things on the list, is you've got to be substantiated. And this is the difference, I suppose, really, with sort of the EU and with the UK. Here, businesses should be able to back up their claims with robust, credible, and up-to-date evidence. Whereas the EU, Paul,
Yeah, the answer is, although it's the same idea that they should all be, credible and robust and up to date. The answer is businesses need to supply what is known as a verifier, as in a third party independent uh, quango,
yeah,
quango, whatever, uh, who they then put their basically rubber stamp on to make sure that all the claims are truthful and accurate, as in up to their belief. So if of course they lie to the independent third party, then they can get into awful trouble, because of course the independents, they put their stamp on in all good faith, saying we believe it is, and you've now ruined your thing. Here's a penalty, and they are allowed to set up penalties separately. Whereas of course the UK, we've taken a more, it's up to the businesses to actually do that, rather than directly have an independent party, because of course the idea of having an independent one is sort of like, you could have all these claims, and this company could be paid off, or whoever, as the independents could be paid off, and then that there could be rubber stamped is just oh yes, pay me $1 million and I'll rubber stamp it. Problem. Whereas of course, if you just tell businesses, of course, to make sure their claims, they are still businesses are still liable under the claims to be proven. They have to actually go through. So instead of having this rubber stamp, which is to avoid the claims, in the UK, technically if you make a claim, you're liable for the claim, in theory. Hasn't been.
Yeah. The EU hope to bring this out, as Paul said, in the next few years. Ours in the UK has been going since, as far as I know, the 20th of September 2021. I looked up the date.
Yes.
You've been listening to the Going Green podcast, looking at green claims and the worrying point about that CO2 levels are still increasing and forecasts are still increasing. We'll be back next time when we have a look at another topic on going green. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And a goodbye from me.
Goodbye.
Bye.